Welcome everyone to Community IT Innovators webinar on managing Google Workspace and Office 365 together. Today, we're really excited to present a case study in an educational setting, the Social Justice School, which is a startup charter middle school in Washington, DC. We're going to explore the differences between the two platforms and when you might like to combine them. We will talk about why you might make an intentional decision to create a hybrid online system the way they have done and how you would manage it. If you joined us last month, we talked about Google Workspace in depth in June. So if you missed it, or if you have more questions after this webinar, I invite you to go back and check that out on our website. You can watch the video or listen to the podcast online. Our focus today is going to be more on how to manage a hybrid system and less on going in depth into Google Workspace. So our learning objectives are to describe Google Workspace and Office 365 as nonprofit IT platforms and learn the basics about each. So after this session, you should be able to know something about that. You will also be able to understand the challenges to managing a cloud-based hybrid system at the enterprise level and describe some solutions. And you will be able to learn about Social Justice School's approach to managing Google Workspace and Office 365 together in an educational setting. So today's webinar is about education, but if you're not in education but interested in these two platforms together, you've come to the right place. Don't worry. Please stay to the end and take the survey after the webinar to help us improve. So one person drawn at random from survey respondents will win a $25 gift certificate. I want to remind everyone now that Community IT is vendor agnostic. So this presentation is discussing how nonprofits use these specific tools and what we are observing about the way nonprofits are using them. But we aren't recommending any platform in general, and we would only make recommendations to our clients based on specific business needs, which in the case of this educational client involved these two platforms. We encourage you to submit questions and comments through the chat feature today. We probably won't be able to get to everything. It's a big topic, but you can always contact us after the webinar for follow-up. And if you're interested in the Social Justice School, we're also going to provide the contact information so you can find out more about them. This webinar is being recorded, and I'll post the video, the podcast, and the transcript on our site within a week. So don't feel like you have to spend a lot of time taking notes today. If you happen to be watching on YouTube right now, we encourage you to subscribe to our channel so that you'll get updates every time we post a new webinar. And we also invite you to subscribe to our email list on our website so that you could register for our webinars and ask your questions in real time. All right, with that, I'm going to move on to introduce myself. My name is Carolyn Woodard. I'm in charge of outreach at Community IT. I'll be monitoring the Q&A in the chat and helping Norwin with his presentation. And I've already learned a lot about Google Workspace and Office 365 just from putting this together. So I'm looking forward to learning more about it and hearing about the Social Justice School. So Norwin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello, and thank you for that. All disclosures. My name is Norwin Herrera. I'm an IT business manager. I've been in Community IT for about 3 years now. And I'm the IT business manager for specifically for the Social Justice Group.
And can you tell me, just before we go on, a little bit more about the IT business manager at Community IT and what your role is? So my understanding is that when an organization doesn't have its own IT director specifically on staff, that's something that you do.
Yes, that's exactly the role. It's a kind of new, IT business manager is kind of new name in the industry, but it's usually when you have a managed service provider like Community IT, and the organization that is requesting the services, they don't have an IT director, or they need somebody to give them guidance how to manage their IT internally. They get an IT business manager assigned to them. So basically, it's like having an internal IT director or CTO, if you want to call it, whatever use you want for it, at a different price, basically, because we're not there 24/7, but we are there 24/7, meaning we are not physically with the company, with the organization every day, but if they need us and they send us an email, they give us a call, or they request time from us, we are right there when they need it. And then we know our role is to know and understand exactly how is the organization infrastructure, so we can give the better advice, when they need it. It's basically, that's our role as ITVM for all our clients.
Excellent. And I think you also you develop a long-term relationship with them. So you understand kind of where they're coming from, their organization, and you can help them with strategy, which is something.
Yes, we help them with everything. Basically, we see the infrastructure, we see where are the needs to improve. And sometimes, most of the time, we help them as well with budget, which is one of the biggest thing and challenge in organizations. Sometimes organizations don't have a budget for technology. They just pay the website, they pay the developer, they pay for their domain name, but they forget other stuff, that are important in the organization. So our role is to make sure that they have money allocated for technology, because technology is not a luxury, and the organization is basically part of the strategic role in the organization. So IT is in a strategic role in the organization, so everybody can basically take advantage of it.
Great. That's a great answer. So before we go a lot farther, I'm going to introduce Community IT for anyone who's not familiar with us. We are 100% employee-owned managed service provider. We provide outsourced IT support, and we work exclusively with nonprofit organizations. Our mission is to help nonprofits accomplish their missions through the effective use of technology. We serve nonprofits across the United States, and we've been doing this for over 20 years. We are technology experts, and we are consistently given the MSP 501 recognition for being a top MSP, which is an honor we actually just this week received again for 2022. So I haven't had a chance to update our graphic for it, but we're happy to still be in the 501 club, basically. And so now I'm very happy to welcome our guest presenter from the Social Justice School, Dominique Diggs. So Dominique, would you like to introduce yourself and the Social Justice School?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Dominique Diggs. I was serving at the Social Justice School as a senior manager of operations and development, but I have moved into like a strategy operations consultant role with the Social Justice School, but I did help to found our school, and I work heavily on our processes and programs still. And so I was the one who basically developed the relationship with Community IP, knowing that we had a stringent need for technology infrastructure, and that we were not the experts on that. And so they have been extremely essential to our school since we started the relationship. And I'm really excited to tell you all more about our school and the ways in which that we are really integrating technology and different management pieces to be successful in our operation.
And would you like to talk a little bit more about the school itself and your mission?
Yeah, I'm actually in our school building right now because I've had a number of meetings today. So it's the Social Justice School. We were founded in 2020, and we're located in the Northeast neighborhood of Washington, D.C. by the Fort Totten Metro. We were founded by two long-term educators who've worked in DC schools for about 2 decades, Myron Long, who's our executive director, and then Brandon Johnson, who is our founding principal. Our educational model really just focuses on building like blocks for rigorous academic instruction that also really include learning expeditions to apply like real life thinking and critical thinking skills that are all rooted in social justice and liberatory design thinking. Liberatory design thinking for us is really just giving our scholars the opportunity to develop and design responses to systems of inequity that are, the goal is to create an inclusive and equitable world. That's really big for us. So our mission is aligned with just like love, learning, and liberation. We believe that that learning is always kind of the key for our scholars and their families to really understand the history behind why things happen and to critically think about ways to respond to those systems if they are inequitable, to come up with ways to make more equitable outcomes for communities that are underrepresented and underserved.
Awesome. It's an amazing mission. We're so proud and happy to work with you on that and make sure that technology side of it works so that the school side of it can work. And for everyone listening, the website is thesocialjusticeschool.org. So you can catch up with them later and contact them if you're interested in more information on that. All right, so now we're going to do a little bit of interaction to get things going. I'm going to give you a poll, if I can get it to start. All right, here we go. All right, so this poll is about, are you a hybrid already? And if you are a hybrid, are you a happy hybrid is the first choice. Are you all Google all the time? Are you all Microsoft for everything? Are you an unhappy hybrid? So you are struggling to manage your systems, which there's no judgment here. This is what we're here to talk about. It's complicated. So, and the last option was not applicable. All right, so I am going to, it looks like a couple of people are still answering. Some answers are still coming in, so I'm about to close it. So if you were sitting back trying to think about what your answer is, go ahead and click one in. All right, so it looks like, there we go. So Norwin, would you mind reading the percentages of the answers for us?
Yes, if I see them. I can't see them.
Oh, you can't see them. Okay, I'll read them because I can still see them. All right. So my nonprofit is all Google all the time was about 17%. All Microsoft was 21%. A happy hybrid was about 30%. And an unhappy hybrid was 33%. So those two are very close. So people who are happy with the way that they're managing them together, and then people that are maybe have some more questions. Oh, you know why you can see it? Because I didn't share the results. There you go. So now everyone should be able to see it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close out of that. Here is the poll. All right, so next we're going to talk about a couple definitions. So for those of you who are interested in these two platforms, we didn't want to just jump in assuming that you knew everything about them already. So we're going to quickly go through some definitions, and we're going to start with Google Workspace and what tools it includes, and maybe a little bit of the tools that Social Justice School is using. So Norwin, could you talk a little bit about this slide?
Well, if I see the poll, we have only 17% of the people is not using Google in this webinar. So it's very interesting because some way our audience already know about Google and the use. Why I made a little mark in some of the list of the services that Google Workspace provide. And I just made it this way because I wanted to point out that some people have all the capacity to use Google Workspace, but they just use the minimum. Usually they use the Gmail, they use the Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Drive. And I think Google Meet sometimes, sometimes they choose, sometimes the organizations choose to use Zoom, for example, for communicating with the learners, with the students. In this case, remember in the pandemic, Zoom took a really high peak of sales and usage, and it was about to die. Honestly, when we became in the pandemic, Zoom was going to disappear, and then suddenly they revived and became alive. But I just wanted to mention that people uses only these 5 most of the times, and they use Google Drive, of course, to share data, to share their files, to share their documents, and they don't use it the way that it's supposed to be used. I think there is a presentation about Google, a webinar about Google Workspace for last month, if I'm not mistaken, with the Steve. So if you want to know more about Google Workspace and all the benefits, you can check it out in that one. And in this case, go ahead. You want to ask me?
I was just going to say, before we go to the next slide, if you wanted to talk a little bit about, for anyone on the webinar who's really actually interested because of the education case study, if you wanted to talk a little bit about, there's Google Classroom, there's the Chromebook program, and then Google Workspace for Education is what schools are using. Is that correct?
That is correct. Nonprofit organizations can apply for a Google, in this case it's Google for Education, but there is Google for nonprofits as well. And they receive, basically they receive most of the packages almost free. Almost free. I'm not gonna say free completely, but almost free. And then same case scenario with Microsoft, right? There is, and we help them in the process. So basically, if they don't have it, community can help them to get that benefit from Google. In this case, I think Dominic and her team already applied for the School of Justice. So they already had it when we got on board with them. So we just tweak it a little bit, you know, we start using it from the point they already got it. And in Office 365, it's exactly the same thing. You know, people have Microsoft Office, but they use only Word, Excel, PowerPoint. If they're using the email, they use the email. Sometimes they're, right now, for example, they are not using SharePoint. I mean, no SharePoint, they're not using OneDrive, which is their personal cloud. So the OneDrive is similar to the Google Drive, right? So you have a cloud space that is a personal space. Usually they give you like a gigabyte. So it's pretty huge, you know. You don't need to carry on your thumb drive anymore to save your files. You can save them right there in your Google Drive. I mean, OneDrive. The difference, I mean, not the difference. The thing is, this is a property of the organization that is providing you the account. Okay, so it's not your personal, it is your personal drive, but it's not yours. It's part of the company. So when you leave, you are going to need to take it and, you know, save it somewhere else. But usually people stay in organizations for a long time. So I use mine for personal, I mean, barely for personal, but I use mine. Community.
I think we talked a lot about the file sharing in the webinar last month. It is a little bit complicated, so I don't want to delve down into it here, but if you do have questions, we also got a couple of questions that came in through the Q&A, and I just want to reassure everyone that if there are questions that we can't get to, I will put them in the transcripts with an answer from our experts at Community IT. So there's a couple of fairly specific questions in the Q&A right now, which we might not have a chance to get to. We'll see if we have time at the end. We'll try to circle back around to them. But don't worry, we will answer them. We just might not have time today because it's only an hour. So I wanted to go to the next slide, which is kind of reinforces what Norwin was just saying about the different platforms have very similar tools to do similar things. I wanted to make sure to mention some people have had questions about Google Workspace because it uses Gmail, but it's when you're using Google Workspace, you have a license for it, you get your own domain. So you have a professional looking email, you know, your name at your domain. It's not at a Gmail account. So just to clarify that for anyone who had questions about that. So we tried to match up most of these tools with what they are on the two different platforms. So you can see they're very, very comparable. And if we go to the next slide, Norwin, you talked a little bit about this already, about the licenses. So did you want to talk a little bit more to describe the different licenses available?
Yeah, this part is extremely complicated because there's a bunch of licenses everywhere. And depending on the need that you have in your organization, that's the license you're going to use. If you want to use the cloud version of them, they are free. So you can like open a browser, put your credentials and use it. You can use Word, Excel, PowerPoint. You can use everything free. I mean, you don't have to pay. If you want to install those applications in your computer, that's the tweak. You know, sometimes for Microsoft, for example, you have to purchase a license that is a monthly cost. We as community IT usually recommends the Microsoft Business Premium because it has almost everything, and also it's autopilot Intune is included, something that we recommend for our organizations because it's automatic installation basically, and only the people in your organization can use that device. There's something similar to that in Apple, in the Apple Business Manager is called. So you enroll your device to Apple Business Manager, and as soon as you enroll it, you can deploy software. We as community IT, we deploy something that we call Adigi. We use Adigi as a tool to manage the devices, and through Adigi we install the software in the computers. There has to be a previous conversation with the organization to install, for example, Microsoft, Adobe, Google Chrome. If you want to have Mozilla, Slack, any software that you want to install in those computers, we can install it, and it's easier to deploy the devices. Also, if somebody steals that computer, you can block the computers. You can factory reset it if you think it's never going to come back. So you can factory reset the device remotely so you don't lose data, and also you have a backup of the data if you are using in the cloud data. So that's what is the licensing about. It's kind of complex to explain every single license, but if you reach out to us, you know, we have a really good department that can guide you through. If you want to become one of our customers, well, welcome to
I
contact
was
us.
going to say, I think that's that goes back to what we were saying about your role as the IT business manager. So we do have, I think, clients, nonprofits who have started out in the free tier on either of these platforms, because when you're starting a nonprofit, you're really cost conscious. But generally, when as you grow and as you're planning for growth, I think our general recommendation would be that at some point you have to mature as an organization and pay for your licenses, and you're just going to get a lot more. Like, you have a lot more storage, you have a lot more security, like you were saying. You're going to need that for your business needs. All right, I'm going to go along to our next slide, which is a little bit more about workspace. So the characteristics and advantages, and particularly for today's case study, you know, we talked a little bit about Google is becoming a pretty industry standard for educational settings. So did you want to talk a little bit about that, Norwin?
I mean, usually, as I said, in the pandemic, this came like on top of it, you know, because something that also was a factor here is that the industry of computers crashed. You know, people was not buying computers anymore. Why? Well, because your phones were acting as a computer, and people really didn't need to have a computer at home. So in the pandemic, and in the moment that everybody started saying, okay, we're going to convert ourselves into remote work, right? So everybody said, I need a computer, I need a laptop. So people start buying laptops. It was a high shortage of computers in the whole planet because they were not prepared for this. And in the same time, Chromebooks, you know, which is Chromebooks is the ones that are being used by educational institutions, because they're not completely a computer, but they look like a computer. They are attached to a Google account. So as a Chromebook is made by Google. So basically, these two factors made that basically the workspace environment improve. So it was a push in between the whole industry, right? So one of the things that is happening here in the workspace characteristics, I'm not just going to read it out loud. You know, lightweight, quick, and easy, no Windows partiality, fantastic search. I mean, search engines are now the key for it. Fits well with the best of the breed stack, oriented towards the end user. Of course, they need to make it easier for the user, and a strong presence in school, as I explained before, and work great with other workspace users and tools. So basically, it's a similar thing with the Microsoft 365. What I wanted to say about this is either Microsoft or Google have been in the industry for a long time. So they know what they are doing. So you sometimes between choosing Google and Microsoft is more about your personal preference than the tool itself. You know, Microsoft wants to be a complete IT stack. Office desktop suite has been a standard oriented toward the administrator. Microsoft DNA is that it is an enterprise service company. They have always worked with the IT department. So work great with other Microsoft users. So one of the benefits from Microsoft, why me personally, right? I'm going to give you my personal opinion. Why do I go a little bit for Microsoft? Well, because everything in Microsoft is there. So they know what they have, they know what they're building, and every time they build something, they make sure that they connect to another one. So all the tools that they have built in the Microsoft space is connected to one another, and for some reason makes the collaboration easier. And if you want to talk about security, well, and the moment that you enter your Microsoft account and you add multi-factor authentication as a secure method right now, you are securing the whole environment at the same time. So you don't need to be protecting my files, protecting my email, protecting my documents, so you don't have to protect them all separate, all in once.
I skipped over a slide because I wanted to, I think the way you were talking about it just led me to this slide, which is in general, inside each of those platforms, they do want to keep you inside of the platform. So like you said, Microsoft all integrates with the other Microsoft tools, Google within Google's Workspace all integrates within itself. So if you are in one of those platforms, in general at Community IT, we would recommend you to stay in that platform, because if you're going to be trying to get, something else, it's like paddling against the current. So why wouldn't you paddle with the current? It's a lot easier to work within that platform. But in this case, we're talking about a deliberate combination of the two. So before we get to that, though, I want to quick jump back to the slide that I skipped, because this came from a pre-registration question, which was about how to protect client, student, and staff data on the cloud. So this particular combination that we're talking about, Google Workspace with Office 365, is cloud-based. And I think a lot of people have questions about that, if it's as secure as other systems that maybe we had before. So I don't know, Norwin, do you want to talk about this, or do you want me to tackle it?
I mean, I can talk about it if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
And you can help me out if it's need to. There is one of the biggest things right now that we're recommending to everybody is have a second factor authentication associated with your account. That's, period. There's no negotiation about that one. If you want to protect your organization, invest in deploying multi-factor authentication, okay? Because
Absolutely.
yes, there is, in our report, we have a report for a cybersecurity report. You can find it on our website. You can download it. You can see the whole report. We have everything about security is written right there in the report. So there is no one single organization that have been compromised if they have multi-factor authentication. All the compromised all in our clients, yes, all the organizations that have been compromised is because they didn't implement multi-factor authentication. And it's not because we didn't mention it or we didn't encourage them to
Just to be clear.
Just to be clear, is because sometimes the organization think it's so difficult to deploy a project that they ask for permissions. They want to negotiate with the organization. When do we do it? What is the best time? There is never going to
be the best time is yesterday.
The best time is yesterday. Exactly. So if you want to protect your organization, if you want to know what is the best way to protect them, multi-factor authentication. That's the first one that I'm thinking on top of my head. Okay. So don't waste your time. Go ahead and do it. And then there is some information here that you can use, you know.
Sure. I want to
But
go over it a little bit quickly
yes,
because we want to be mindful of time. So we often say that any platform can be used insecurely, even if it's a secure platform. So if you share your login with someone, your password with someone, then it's not a secure platform anymore. And that the training is really important to develop that sense of security and that your staff know how to be proactive and protected online. And like you said, the strong passwords, multi-factor authentication. I also want to remind people that if you have personally identifying information in your database, particularly if you're working with students, then you have specific requirements, legal requirements on that. So you need to know what those are. There are federal guidelines around that. And then if you have specific questions for your organization that we're not able to answer today, we have a cybersecurity expert on our staff, so you can get a hold of them at our website. All right, so I'm sorry to push this ahead, but I'm going to go ahead and do our next poll. And that is, here we go. All right, so this question is, what does your nonprofit do? So I want to see how many of our audience are in education or education adjacent, and how many of you are here for the insights in general and are not specifically oriented toward an education charter school or nonprofit that deals with education and students. Or of course, the third option is other or don't know or not applicable. All right, so we'll give you another moment or two to let some more people click the button. And then this time I'm going to try and actually share the results.
now I can read them.
All right, go ahead.
We are in the education sector of education adjacent, 25%. We are not in education, but here for the insights in general, 58%, and other is 17%. So we have a lot of people who's not in the education sector, but I'm pretty sure they will benefit from the inputs, analysis, and information.
Excellent. Okay. So Dominic, thank you for sticking with us as we ran through the two platforms. I just want to remind, kind of quickly review your mission at Social Justice School was to provide a strong academic but experiential kind of environment for your students. So you knew going into it very early on as you were planning the school that you would need to have a strong tech support for your students because they'd be doing a lot online and a lot, out and about basically. And also that your staff are, because of the job and the students and where they're coming from, are also fairly young and tech savvy. So do you want to talk a little bit more about some of the decisions that you made as you guys were starting up to make these decisions?
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn, for summing that up. I think the biggest piece when I first met Norwin and kind of we were discussing the needs of the school was to have a technology infrastructure that would allow for our staff to operate effectively and safely across platforms. So we knew we were using the Google for Education, that's where we bought our domain, but we also knew that we wanted for there to be an extra security layer there in terms of just like a file sharing and like access to accounts. So Norwin, initially set up the Microsoft MFA for our teachers. And so that has been a huge help just to ensure that, privacy and security remain at the forefront. But then in terms of, as we continue to grow, knowing that Google, had specific permissions for the adults on our team, we knew that we also had to create a second domain for our students so that we could, put the permissions in place for our students to not visit websites that were against school policy. And, for us to also have them to access some of the more trafficked websites that they use during the school day. So that's where Norwin and I worked to create the second domain for our students specifically. And so we just, really working with Norwin, who is the expert on all these things and giving us like the best recommendations so that it was reliable, one, for our staff. We were able to easily train them on the ways in which, like, we're doing all these things, and that it would be like sustainable for us as we continue to grow, because we are still not in our final phase of growth. And so we are still very much doing work with Norwin and his team to continue to try to put some more things into place that make the most sense for our organization.
Yeah, I know that one of the things Norwin talked about when we were first talking about this presentation was both that flexibility and also the scalability. So you can add in a lot more students, you can add in more staff. When students are no longer students, it's easy to remove them from the system. So I think that, clearly made a lot of sense for you as you made the business decision. Do you feel comfortable talking about some of the challenges that you anticipated, or also the challenges that you are, facing?
Yeah, I think initially at the beginning of last school year, the anticipated challenge was for our students to get used to doing the login for the new domain that we created for them, and being able to just browse the web safely and not going against any of like our permissions or access points. The other anticipated challenge was really coming up with a way for the staff to file share. That's actually something that Norwin and I are in the process of developing, is a true like knowledge management piece around like file sharing and file storage, so that all of our teachers are able to just have all of their documents and things in the cloud. And just so because again, reliability is important for our organization, and right now it feels like they do rely on the sign-in features and the different like access pieces that they have to Google and to Microsoft. But in terms of the file management and the storage pieces, that's going to be a huge challenge, because we want folks to kind of speak the same language in that realm, and we haven't been able to get there just yet.
Awesome. You are not alone. I will absolutely say.
Yeah. An additional challenge I'll name, sorry, Carolyn, is that
go ahead.
Right now our student email domain, because of the permissions that we've set up so that they're not, again, like not doing things that are outside of our permissions, our teachers have not been able to really like email back and forth with our students because they're from a different domain. So that's what we also kind of need to figure out, how our teachers and students can do file sharing across their domains, because we don't want to allow outside access for, so our students are not communicating with like other people.
Right. So that they have shared access to the files that they need to share, for sure. Yeah, I was just going to say that in our webinar last month as well, we talked a lot about the chaos that can ensue when staff and people in your organization have two different ways to do almost the same thing. So if you could share a file in SharePoint, or you could share it in Google Drive, then you have some people are doing it one way, some people are doing it the other way, and how best to handle that. And I think you can go all the way from just shutting it down, like taking that permission away, so there's only one way that they can do it, or you can go all the way to the other side of just trying to do it with training. So this is the way we do this thing, and here's why it works, but just you have to be continually doing the training. So for sure, that's a challenge. I think also, I just wanted to touch on a couple of challenges that maybe might be more relevant for people in the audience than for social justice schools. So Norwin had mentioned earlier that this is a startup, and so you're starting out with a deliberate choice into this, using the two platforms. But if you were using one and trying to go to a hybrid system, or maybe doing a hybrid system on your way to maybe migrating entirely to the other platform, then you would have a lot more issues with change management and training, and really communicating with people why you're doing what you're doing and how they're supposed to be doing it now, different processes. And you might have a lot of pushback as well, because as Norwin said, people get so familiar and comfortable with the platform that they're used to, and then asking them to go to do things in a, we have comparable tools, but they do things in a slightly different way. So that can be a challenge. And then another challenge that we looked at when we were talking about this, maybe it's not a challenge, is being able to do everything remotely. So if you are moving from being a server-based organization, and I think the pandemic and working remotely made a lot of organizations kind of rethink this and try to go to the cloud. It can be really complicated, right? So you're doing a big migration, you're choosing your platform, doing a migration. As Norwin said, you're looking at all of the files that you have to migrate or make an information architecture for them. How are the files going to be shared? Which department gets access to which other department? All of those pieces. So this is just to say to people who are listening in the audience, like, we hear you, we feel you, it's difficult. So those are challenges that come up, and maybe we'll do a future webinar specifically about migration. And so how, if you're not starting from scratch, which Social Justice School was so lucky that you were starting out and you could make this deliberate choice, you can move to something that's going to work for you if it addresses your business needs.
I wanted to mention that one of the biggest challenges that I found usually is the people willing to change or to receive the change. And then the other one is leadership. In this case, in this particular case, the School of Justice is very open to our recommendations and our suggestions how to move with technology. But sometimes in the organizations, you find leadership that they don't want to change or they don't want to move. So in reality, it's not about technology, it's about decision making.
The people.
So the people making the decision. So that, and then the other one is you need to invest in training. Sometimes people say, I don't have time, but it's not true that they don't have. I mean, it's possible they don't have time, but you need to prioritize, right? So you need to learn how to use the tools that you have as maximum capacity. And then your life is going to be easier.
This is a perfect segue into our next slide, Norwin. I knew.
That is correct. Yes, that is correct.
So
yeah.
I think in this case, like, clearly the Social Justice School made a really good choice of their system and their platform. So Norwin, if you wanted to talk just a little bit about this slide for people.
I mean, this is sharing a little bit of the trend in the Social Justice School life. But if you can see, there is basically almost no tickets from the Social School of Justice. It's either they are resolving very well without us, or the decision that we made in terms of technology is working. If you see the pike that you see in June 26th, is because they're in registration period. So they are increasing the number of staff. So this is exactly what we thought about it. Almost 2 years ago with Dominic, is like the school is going to grow and we need to grow easy, not only in the staff, students, but also technology. So we made everything ready for scalability. That's basically what is this graph telling you. So we made the right choice.
So I love it. And I had more to say about how important it is to have a IT business manager helping you along with the strategy and knowing so much about the different options that are out there. But I'm going to skip over that because we want to get to the case study. And I'd love for you, Norwin, to be able to talk a little bit. Now, for people on the webinar that are suddenly freaking out at this slide, like, this is very technical, we're just going to do a couple of slides of some more of the technical issues so Norwin can explain to people who want to know, like, kind of how you did the setup.
Yes, so basically it's they have Google and they also have Microsoft, and at the same time, and the identity provider is called is Microsoft. So we create the accounts in Microsoft, and Microsoft basically synchronized with Google. So they synchronize their account with Google. And then, so to log into their account is kind of interesting because they go to Google site, they put their username and password, but it's redirected to Microsoft to authenticate. So they authenticate with the multi-factor authentication. There's nobody at the School of Justice without MFA. So they're using multi-factor authentication, and usually we recommend to use push notification as a method of authentication, because you can have more than one method. So the method we're recommending is push notification. We're not recommending SMS, because SMS can be intercepted as well. So that's why we say use push notification. So, and the moment they are authenticated, they come back to Google and they keep working into Google Workspace. But if they want to collaborate, you know, and this is a graph that explains a little bit that. So if they want to collaborate with the Microsoft environment, they can do it because they are authenticated in Microsoft as well. So they have an account in Microsoft, and they also have their account in Google. So they can use, for example, all the Microsoft suite that is installed in their computers. And also, School of Justice is kind of interesting scenario. They started with Windows computer and then transfer, then they moved from Windows computer to Mac computers. So now everybody has a Mac computer. So we are installing their Mac computers, the Microsoft suites, and they can use the Microsoft collaboration tools if they want, you know, and they can use the Google collaboration tools if they want as well, because they are in that environment naturally in the Google environment. It's kind of interesting how it works. Then now, because the social school of justice is new, you know, they are still developing things. And the next big step is to create the SharePoint infrastructure for them so they can collaborate easier. I recommend SharePoint. Is better than Google. Okay. Personally, it's a natural environment. It's like, you know, it's like you're opening a folder and you're saving your files. Specifically, if you're synchronizing some of the libraries, you don't need to synchronize the whole library. I mean, the School of Justice can, because it's a small organization, only 2 years old. But if you have an organization that is 10 years old, you have a bunch of files, you don't want to synchronize everything, but you know what you're working on. For example, if you work in development, you can synchronize the development folder. If you work in human resources, you can synchronize the human resources folder. That's why I recommend SharePoint, because it's easier to manage and easier to apply security in the sharing structure, right? So in this case of the School of Justice, they have the staff that goes in one direction and the students goes in the other one, the Scholar Activists, sjs.org. And they use the Chromebook, they have Clever, they have Google Classroom, and they also have their own system information, student system information. I don't have the name of the one that I'm using, but they have a system. So everything is managed by Clever as well over there. And we're applying the rules of security by the Google console. So they have a group. Every single student goes inside to as a user, but the user is classified as a student, and we apply the rules to the student group. So basically, this group is very, very, as Dominic says, is very well protected, that nobody can talk to. I mean, they have a problem now we have to fix, but it's something that is doable. You know, it's something that we can easily fix. It's not difficult to fix.
Which I think gets to some of our tips, which I want to make sure that we move along. So we have time for a couple of questions at the end, but I want to remind everyone who's put questions in the Q&A. I'm not sure we're going to have enough time to talk about all of them, but we will answer them in the transcript. So you will receive an email showing you where that link is, and you can look up your question there and get the answer. So one of the tips that we talked about that I just thought was fascinating after talking with you both was that you created different domains for the different groups. And that gives you like an immediate visual of who you're interacting with, if it's a student or a staff member. And so for people who aren't in an education setting, they might have different, you know, they might not need this, or they might think, oh, this will be great. We could use this for like our active volunteers or our clients that are using our systems or anything like that. So you can easily visually show that you have different groups. Another tip, I'm sorry, this slide has a ton of language on it, but to think through your information architecture and be prepared to adapt once your staff are using the system. So you could think of using these two platforms as kind of like an a la carte menu, like you choose one thing from one thing from the other. I think Norwin's presentation kind of showed that they have an umbrella, and then you go into it, and then within that you're using Google after you've authenticated through Microsoft, all of that. But you do have access to those Microsoft tools, within your Google space. So if you are doing that, we talked about having robust training so that people know where they're going to be sharing their files and saving them. And that you can in some ways use like the different features that are stronger. So using the Microsoft licenses to take care of the ID and the security and maybe some other administrative tasks, like Norwin, you were talking about Autopilot and Intune, which allows you to, and Adigy, which allow you to remotely configure the laptops as you're deploying them. And we have a whole other webinar last summer, actually, in a blog post article also about Autopilot and Intune and how those work. So we're not going to be able to go into them, but just know that you have a lot of options. And then I loved, Norwin, you had this great tip, especially for this educational setting where you have a student test account and you also have a student Chromebook. So you are remote from the school and managing all of those help desk, the small number of help desk requests that come in remotely. But when you change the student Clever accounts, you can see exactly how they're working, what they look like to a student. And I just thought that was such a great tip, because we know, particularly with students or with other users who maybe are, like, we don't want to have any barriers to them using the technology. And so being able to see what they see, I just thought that was a really a great way to be able to do that. And then again, we can't say enough. All the staff are required to use multi-factor authentication to protect their accounts and the security. But for the students, you decided that adding that multi-factor authentication was going to be a barrier. And so they have a single sign-on. And then within that, I believe they also have an additional secure, additional student security that they use as well. So, so that's how you handle that, to try to make it, once you've logged in, the students are just inside that system and they can use all of the tools without having a lot of other checks and barriers, but they're in a very secure system, which anytime you have students, you have to be careful about that.
That is correct.
All right, so we're going to move on to the questions. And Norwin, I know that you had a couple of questions from the registration that you were planning to answer.
Yes, I did have a couple of them, and I have been trying to answer some of the questions posted here in the
Q&A. Thank you.
In the Q&A, I have been trying to respond to some of them, but I think I can share a couple of them that I have. For example, somebody asked, how can we best protect client, student, and staff on the cloud? I mean, my response was, excerpt from our 2022 nonprofit cybersecurity incident response report, explain 3 of the next steps to protect your nonprofit organization. Is 1, start with an IT acceptable use of policy. Second one is implement a security awareness training program. We help you with that as well, and require multi-factor authentication. So having the policy is important. Written policy in your organization is one of them. The second one is train your users how not to do things in the wrong way. Usually users, they're frozen when they see something they don't know in the computer, right? So if we train them, what is correct, what is not correct is better. So that's training your staff is a high invest in security. That will be one of the best. So
training,
I have
training. I think actually, Norwin, I'm going to have to cut you off for answering the questions. I'm so sorry. But we will answer them in the transcript. So I want to go back over our learning objectives that you would learn about Google Workspace and Office 365 as platforms, understand some of the challenges of using them together as a cloud-based, enterprise level management, and learn about the social justice school's approach to managing them together. And I just wanted to make sure before we let people go, or before people have to go, that next month we are going to talk more about cybersecurity, but we're going to talk about it from the perspective of cyber insurance. So for a lot of nonprofits, this is becoming a lot more rigorous. The application, what you need to certify that you have in place, the controls. So we're going to talk about that with an expert. Her name is Jenna Kirkpatrick-Howard. She's with Lockton Companies. She has 19 years of experience with cyber insurance specifically. So she's going to tell us about what's changed over the past year and a half, and how nonprofits can work to make sure that they are getting the coverage that they need, and that they are putting the controls in place to make sure that when they have a claim, they qualify under that claim. And so we're going to have Matt Eshelman, who's our cybersecurity expert, joining Jenna to talk about some practical tips. So this webinar is not just for the finance folks or the insurance folks or the IT folks. It's really for anyone at a nonprofit. We're going to teach you about the cybersecurity that goes with being able to get the insurance and those issues. So I want to welcome or help everybody. We'll come back for that. And I want to remind everyone to stay to the end today. And when you leave the webinar, you're going to see a survey, and that really, really helps us improve our webinars. So if you can fill that out first, that's great. And someone will be chosen at random from the survey respondents to receive a $25 gift certificate. So I just want to make sure that we leave people with the contact information for the Social Justice School. You can contact them about enrolling your child in DC. You can contact them about being a startup, about being a charter school, about being an education organization, or on the other side, you can contact us about managing the Google Workspace and Office 365 together. And this was a case study. Of course, there are lots of other organizations that might want to be looking at that and making a deliberate decision around that. So I want to make sure to thank Dominique. Thank you so much for spending so much of your time with us, and for being willing to spend the time and talk about your amazing organization. And we're just so happy and proud that this is working for you. And I see that, we know we have a couple more projects we're going to work on. The work is never done. But I think this was a great case study in how it can be successful. And Norwin, thank you also so much for sharing your time and sharing your experience with this client. And I just think it was a fantastic case study. So thanks again. And don't forget to take the survey when you leave. I think I had one more person who had a question, but I think they raised their hand, but I think they put their hand down. So now I don't know who they are. Thank you.
Somebody asked me about what is the software that the School of Justice is using for teaching. I don't remember the name. If you want to share.
They asked about our software.
The system, student information system.
Oh, we use our student information systems, the database management. It is we use PowerSchool as our major data systems for like student information, but then we also use Clever also as the single sign-on that kind of just hosts all of the different apps that our students rely on for their daily instruction.
Great. Yeah, that's the ones that I was looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, PowerSchool and Clever are the main ones. Yep.
And we'll include all of the links to all of these in the transcript, and we'll also have some contact information. So if you have more questions, you can always get in touch with us, and we'll see what we can do to help track down the tool or whatever your question is about. So thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope that you'll join us next month.